Hello, and a warm welcome to this second webinar, which bringing you solutions for climate adaptation from all corners around the world. My name is Rudy, and I will be your host in this upcoming 1 hour, I have to say. And we have actually two speakers sitting anxiously in the wings, waiting to present to you their insights. And we're coming to you at a different time if you watch this live than regularly, not on the Dutch Friday morning, but on the Dutch Friday afternoon. And we've got a very good reason for that, because one of our keynote speakers, he is actually coming to us all the way live from Canada, and that's a big time difference. Please, dear guests, Flores and both Darren, let us see you for a little bit, that we can also hear you. Flores, there you are. You're a Dutch professor on climate adaptation. You will be telling us about some of the things going on in the Netherlands. And also we have Darren Swanson from Winnipeg, centrally located in Canada. Especially a warm welcome to you. How are you feeling? Are you all ready for it, Darren?
All ready to go. Got the first cup of coffee under the belt.
Yeah, still early in the morning for you. And on the other side, Flores, you're actually flying out whenever it's still possible, because live, I heard the traffic report just now on the Dutch radio, and it was in line with all the clouds. It's pouring down after a few weeks of absolute drought. So it's a very actual subject that we're covering. How can we have water or water resilient infrastructure? Yes, excellent. Also a very warm welcome, obviously, for all the people attending here in the call. We love to hear from you. Actually, technically, we cannot hear you, but you can come up with your answers using the Q&A button. Gentlemen, I already said that the two of you are providing us with a presentation. Darren, you will be the first one coming to us with a presentation of about 15 minutes. And you're a senior associate with the International Institute for Sustainable Development in Canada. And also you're a director of the Novel Futures Corporation. So having various perspectives. Same holds for Flores. I will introduce him a little bit further later on. But please, Darren, whenever you're ready for it, please share your slides and take it away with your presentation coming from Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rudy, and thank you to the platform for the invitation to speak to you here today, and to everyone for accommodating this the different hour for the webinar. Going to focus, of course, on talking about climate resilience in the context of Canadian infrastructure. And I'm going to focus on a report that the International Institute for Sustainable Development published last year, around this time, in fact, where we compiled the latest information on climate hazards and impacts on Canadian infrastructure. We took stock of the various resilience options that the various types of infrastructure sectors are implementing. And we looked at the range of policies and guidance and standards and financing options that have emerged over the last few years in Canada and also internationally. But I guess before starting in on that, it's good to have a bit of context just to lay the groundwork. Rudy talked a bit about the weather situation right now that you're experiencing. And I'm going to go through that here across Canada, what we've been seeing for the past year. So up in the upper right of this particular chart is, of course, the map of Canada. We've got an east coast, we got a west coast, we've got a north coast, and I'm situated right now speaking to you from right here in the middle on the traditional lands of the First Nations, Treaty 1 territory, and the homeland of the Métis here. And the dot you see there is the city of Winnipeg, located about an hour from the US border. On the chart here, you'll see a number of stats that talk about how the average daily temperature is potentially going to increase quite significantly over the course of the century, where 10-year extreme 24-hour precipitation is going to increase significantly, as well as 50-year extreme 24-hour precipitation. But rather than talk specifically about these numbers, because you can see this, you'll have access to the presentation slides, I'd rather show you some pictures about really what this all means. This is what it looked like last year in British Columbia on the west coast. The town of Lytton, located a couple hours northeast of Vancouver, experienced a temperature of 49.6 degrees Celsius. It was, and we're the second coldest country in the world, apparently. And that was the most extreme temperature recorded north of 45 degrees latitude so far. The next day after that temperature was recorded, the town of Lytton literally burned to the ground in a wildfire that series of wildfires ran rampant across British Columbia during the drought area. And there were 2 fatalities. So this was absolutely tragic. Very, very dry conditions last year. A few months later, the West Coast was the opposite. Right around the same week, I think it was in November, when all countries were in Glasgow at the COP26 coming to an agreement, the area of British Columbia was hit with 7 atmospheric rivers, this new sort of atmospheric phenomenon that just loads the atmosphere with moisture, and what are called 3 weather bombs. And it created a system of floods in the Vancouver area in southwest British Columbia that is looking to be the most destructive and expensive weather-related disaster in Canadian history. So going from just extremes to the other this past year. The East Coast, going all the way across the Atlantic coast, last fall, they were experiencing excess moisture, excess rainfall, and of course it was overloading infrastructure here, stormwater infrastructure, and affecting transportation infrastructure. And we don't want to forget about the middle, where I'm physically located right now. We've had a bit of both, too dry and too wet. So last summer, similar to British Columbia, the middle part of Canada, where the prairies, where a lot of the agriculture, sort of the breadbasket is, experienced, I guess, what farmers and ranchers were calling one of the worst droughts that they've seen in the history. Dozens of rural communities having to declare states of agricultural emergency. It was quite relentless drought, and it was looking bleak. Thankfully, we had a good snowpack this winter, a really above average snowpack, but there were still concerns of drought literally about a month and a half ago about what this summer would mean for drought conditions across the prairies, which are devastating. Then we got hit by extreme snowfall and moisture over this past month. So instead of being concerned about a drought situation, right now we are in a flood situation here in the Red River Valley. And what you see there is a photograph of the highway going to the United States, and that's about a 30-minute drive south from here. And parts of the road have been closed due to the flooding from the Red River, which flows north out of the United States. And communities, First Nations, Indigenous communities being evacuated north of here. So just from one extreme to the other. And the north, we don't want to forget that climate change is seriously and significant in the north. You have about 4,000 kilometers of roads constructed on permafrost in the north, and it's at risk of becoming unstable due to thawing. And that's what you see a photo there. So all of this is, I guess, to explain that I think over the past 12 months, I've done more media interviews and responded to media calls than I have in my entire career. And that is because Canada is facing this extreme conditions that are affecting infrastructure right from coast to coast to coast. All right, so let's take a look at maybe some of the positive sides of things and some observations from the report that we did. Now, this report on advancing climate resilience in Canadian infrastructure, the International Institute for Sustainable Development did a previous stock taking about a dozen years ago. And so we have a bit of a comparative analysis that we can do. And what we've seen is that in Canada, there has been a considerable amount of activity over the past decade, as evidenced not only by the sheer volume of literature available from the different sectors of infrastructure on what they're doing for building resilience, what they're thinking about doing, and what they're researching. So lots of activity. And this applied right across the board to wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, buildings, water supply, transportation, marine, energy, and information communications infrastructure. And we saw it in, I guess, three main areas. In the planning stage, we saw resilience options being built in. We saw them in terms of the structural changes to infrastructure itself, and also in monitoring and maintenance. Sort of three classes of resilience options. And just to take a bit of a sneak peek at just a couple of areas, two of the types of infrastructure covered in the report, water supply infrastructure, you're going to recognize a lot of these climate hazards in your own context. Changing precipitation patterns wreaking havoc on water supply infrastructure. We've got permafrost degradation issues, storm surges on the coasts and the Great Lake areas, and of course drought. But if we're talking about changing precipitation patterns, a lot more intense summer storms, electrical storms, and those of course are affecting when power outages go out, pumping stations are impacted, and so redundant power supplies have been a big thing. And that's not just due to electrical storms. We are starting to see more heavy snowfall come early in the winter or late fall, where the trees still have all the leaves on them. And when that happens, the trees and snow falls, the trees just start to break and fall down because under the weight of the snow. And that takes down power lines. And so power could be out not for hours, but for days. And so redundant power supply systems have to be quite robust. Of course, in excess moisture conditions, we've got flooding situations, treatment plant infrastructure being flooded. We, of course, saw this in the British Columbia floods of last year, where treatment plants were offline. So these are big issues. So flooding protection systems and built infrastructure being a key part, of course. Wastewater, stormwater infrastructure, you'll recognize a lot of these climate hazards from your situations. Of course, looking at the changing precipitation patterns, exceeding stormwater drainage systems is a big issue all the way across Canada, affecting road systems and just access to services in towns where drainage culverts and systems are just overrun, they're over capacity. So a number of communities now are really trying to upgrade and upsize their stormwater drainage systems just because of the repeated flooding that they're experiencing, and climate change just being very real to everyone. Of course, there's other issues too that you'll be familiar with too. When you have excess heat, then of course the higher temperature streams and lower stream flows cause more concentrated effluents. So application of natural infrastructure and installing effluent cooling systems are becoming practices that are being considered. So that's just a snapshot. The report gets into a lot more detail on that. But I do want to talk a bit about a few other observations that we saw compared to 10 years ago. And that one is about natural infrastructure becoming a mainstream option for enhancing the resilience of built infrastructure, but also communities themselves. And that's quite across the country as well. Of course, there's different landscapes where natural infrastructure can be incorporated. And locally here, we have a lot of riverine landscapes, as I alluded to in some of those photos, where flooding and drought can be addressed through combinations of built and natural infrastructure. And with co-benefits is the key part about natural infrastructure. But just what a few of these look like. I know in the area here where we have excess runoff, we have a lot of nutrients coming off the landscape from agriculture. So looking at ways for natural infrastructure to remove those nutrients from waterways used through things such as floating treatment wetlands, which are being deployed. The picture on the right is the Red River floodway system that was constructed around the city of Winnipeg in the 1960s. At the time, this floodway is literally an extra river that was built around the city to protect the city from the floodwaters. At the time, it was the largest it was the second largest earth-moving project in the world, next to the Panama Canal. At the time, it was built for $60 million. And since it's been built, it has avoided tens of billions of dollars of damages to the city of Winnipeg, where I'm situated right now. And that is a hybrid built and natural infrastructure system. Of course, in our rural settings that we have, there are other types of natural infrastructure that become really quite critical. And one of those is engineered wetlands, or you could call distributed water retention systems, where the landscape, the natural wetlands, are enhanced through engineering methods to hold water in wet periods and retain it for drier periods. And to the smaller scale distributed type systems are important for the Canadian landscape because it's so vast. Addressing a lot of the issues of climate change, flood and drought with built infrastructure would just simply not be feasible from a cost perspective. So taking advantage of the landscape is going to be key. A third and final observation we made was that, and this is also positive, is that over the 10 years, a real diverse range of strategies and policies and guides and standards have emerged to really help infrastructure build its resilience. And just looking at a few examples from the federal government in Canada, there's guides and standards, such as what is called the Climate Lens General Guidance, which provides risk assessment methodologies and requirements for municipalities, towns that are going to upgrade their infrastructure to make sure it's climate proof through the century. We've got a climate resilient buildings and core public infrastructure initiative. We've got a range of financing mechanisms that have emerged at the federal level in Canada, knowledge and capacity building programs that help share capacities and build the capacity of professionals across the country, including engineers. We got climate services for climate model projections for climate change, and of course, various policies and strategies, such as a forthcoming national adaptation strategy, the first in Canada, and also a first national infrastructure assessment. So lots going on, but I guess the real question is it all enough? There is a huge infrastructure gap in Canada that is looming. And it's a huge range, but it's a huge gap. At the same time, in 2019, there were concerns about how the amount of municipal infrastructure is in poor or very poor condition, and it was a concerning amount based on the infrastructure report card in 2019. The risk is real. The Council of Canadian Academies ranked infrastructure as Canada's most consequential climate risk, but also where the most potential lies. But last year, the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices did also a detailed study on this and concluded that Canada's infrastructure was not prepared for the climate crisis. So lots going on, but to the scale that's required for the changes that are occurring and the scale of infrastructure that's out there, greater effort and investment is going to be needed across the board to really match the scale of the issue. And just as sort of a last few points here before tying up, Rudy, there are three key areas, of course, where increased incentives for implementing resilience options are important. For example, the climate lens that I mentioned, it's not required for all infrastructure that's being built. It's required for federally and provincially funded infrastructure. It's risk assessment for climate change, and building infrastructure based on future climate is really sort of the only way things can be done now. We need more and diverse sources of financing, including really innovative sources, unlocking the potential of investment portfolios of banks, investment firms, mutual and private insurance companies, and breaking down some of the barriers and caps on investment that are experienced in those sectors for leveraging those funds for resilience. And of course, a systems thinking approach and policy coherence. We hear these words a lot, but they're so important. I mean, for example, decentralizing the responsibility for dike maintenance to a sort of a local government level, while not also decentralizing or devolving funding mechanisms, is a recipe for disaster, and that has been experienced in various settings. So lots to do, lots is being done, lots to do in Canada, and there's lots of ideas for implementing it. It just needs to now to be at the next scale, the next level. So thank you very much, everybody. Merci, and Miigwech, over to you, Rudy.
Thank you very much, Darren, for this overview coming from Canada. And with you presenting this, I realized like it's the second largest country in the world. So vast masses of land, obviously, and huge stretches of roads. That's completely different to the Netherlands. So yeah, you introduced this wonderful topic of natural infrastructure, that there is being more emphasis on it. And if I'm correct, we actually also took along a poll question, isn't it? Maybe it's a good moment to introduce it right now. It's popping up in your screen. So please, people, have you ever applied natural or green infrastructure to adapt to climate change? So maybe in your professional life, maybe in your personal life, getting rid of those tiles in the backyard. We see about 80% actually did so. Because Darren, if I'm correct, there's also a better understanding, or is it just very practical that Canada is embracing these kind of solutions as well, instead of trying to solve everything with concrete or whatever infrastructure?
Well, I think there's probably a number of reasons, and I'm sure Floris is going to touch on that. There's more sort of understanding of how to design natural infrastructure systems and how they can be complementary to build systems. But I think in the Canadian context, as you noted, just the sheer sort of size of the landscape that has to be dealt with outside of the urban areas to deal with resilience across rural landscapes and the north and areas. It just taking advantage and leveraging natural assets, maintaining them, enhancing them, and ways to integrate with built infrastructure is really the only way we're going to be able to tackle resilience across Canada, just given the vastness.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Also, for the example on the floodway, the investment back in the 60s, paying off big time, luckily. Thank you so much for now. We will see you later on at the Q&A. So dear people, please come up with those Q&A questions in the option that we have in the menu bar. Simply leave a question indeed, and people can actually upvote when they want to have it answered. And then after the presentation done by Floris, we will have this Q&A session where both speakers will attend as well. Floris, I think you're all set. You are this professor on climate adaptation, if I'm correct, with the University of Applied Science. What is it? Hanse Hogeschool? How you call Hanse Hogeschool?
Exactly. Yeah, Hanse Hogeschool in Groningen. Yeah.
And also you work with Deltares, which is a huge company, which is also advising policymakers how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And you travel a fair bit yourself as well. You were in Canada recently, not in Winnipeg.
Last week.
Yeah, last week in another region.
Exactly.
So you see what's going on in the world, but this time you will focus on the Netherlands and then also more on urbanism. Yeah,
exactly. Shall I fire away?
Definitely. These upcoming 15 minutes are all yours. There you go.
Okay, perfect. Sharing now. And then you probably should see my first slide. So, yes. So indeed, as Rudy said, urban resilient infrastructure, work at Deltares, Hanse Applied University of Groningen, also the Global Center of Adaptation. So mainly, I am a solution broker. I see what kind of practical implementation on climate adaptation there is in the world, and try to do twinning with different countries or cities to see if we can get some knowledge exchange around the world. And just showing this slide as well, because it's about a combination. Every project has academic, it has education, it has research and professional practice that could be private and public parties. And well, for international guests, if the dikes would break, you will see that water is quite important for my job in this case. So briefly touching on challenges, solutions, very practical. I'm just going to brush through. I really like the poll. Very sorry for this. Still, Rudy, not
Thank
maybe
you.
Your best, but I really like that a lot of you are actually already engaged with green infrastructure, natural solutions. So that would be great to show you some examples, and I hope there will be some more inspiration here. And also, of course, it's a very short presentation, 50 minutes. So I will give you some tools that after this presentation, if you're inspired, where to find these practical things. Well, I think Darren was quite elaborate on the challenges that we have in Canada, all around the world, of course. In the Netherlands, some of the challenges are maybe even bigger or less. Of course, we live below sea level. Subsidence is quite a challenge, but it's also in Canada. So we share a lot of these challenges just to show you in these pictures. And of course, well, the dikes are quite maybe a very specific infrastructure for the Netherlands, but a lot we can share. Just this picture, the Vancouver area with a lot of peat. As we know in the Netherlands, we're not the only one with that recipe. So a lot of subsidence that makes it more difficult. And on the right side, you see also, of course, the subsidence that we have, bodemdaling, as we call it. That makes Canada and also the Netherlands quite comparable in that context. We are sinking cities, so to say, rising sea level, but also the subsidence. So that comes with a lot of challenges, you could say. And just to give a picture on this, on the left side, that's of course not how we're going to go to the future. Lowest point in the Netherlands is already almost 7 meters below sea level. So we tend to come up with solutions, and one of those, maybe you know, a floating pavilion in Rotterdam, so to say. What I want to show you in this short presentation is how can you find these examples if you have a certain problem, the solution brokering. Already told you, work at the Global Center of Adaptation. That's actually a very nice office in Rotterdam with a green roof. It's floating. It has solar panels, so it's an answer to mitigation and also adaptation. And it's now removed, actually, but the floating pavilion was quite close there. And this is a print screen of climatescan.org, where you can find solutions in Canada. Of course, 5,000 solutions and locations in the Netherlands. So you can go to your own area and see what is out there, and you can contribute to that to put your own projects up there. What really helps researchers like me to make analyzing what could be an answer to climate adaptation. Of course, not only in Rotterdam, a lot of cities, because if you name Rotterdam, you also have to put in an example of Amsterdam. Otherwise, you get into fights. So this is all around the Netherlands. Floating urbanization, amphibious life is all around. Not only the houseboats; these are really infrastructure. We have more than 40 locations with floating districts, and probably not a lot of people are aware of that. But also, as mentioned last week, I was in the Vancouver area in Canada, and great examples from Darren, which you can see there. And there were a lot of talks, of course, about the sea level rise, and which really relates to that situation as well, like the floating urbanization, also the Room for the River project, which is quite international known in this case. And I've seen, these are some pictures of floating urbanization in the Vancouver area. And again, you can find that on ClimateScan if you want to do some more research on this. So it was really nice to see a lot of this. And I think that's actually the future. If we see some of these big gray infrastructure, that the future is going to be that we probably will build floating cities. Delta cities are too busy. We need more land, and well, the Dutch make a lot of land, and that will be self-supporting cities, probably close to Delta cities where everybody wants to live. Also airports, it's not new. If you go to Japan, there are a lot of floating airports, and that will be probably the future. So, but maybe that's a bit of the too large context and futuristics. Let's also look at some smaller, resilient, flexible solutions. I kind of like this picture. Who built that wall? There's a flooding there, and of course that relates also to some smaller scale solution that you can find. This is actually because there are a lot of solutions. Floating urbanization, the biggest one, as you can see in the red number 5, but also 10 is more smaller, flexible walls that you can set up. And these flood barriers, this is actually a field lab in Delft where you can visit different types of flexible walls that you can set up, because flooding, it's mostly a couple of weeks a year or once every certain years. So these can be helpful to just make your city resilient without making large gray infrastructure like dikes or dams or everything. And of course, both is needed. But also in this context, Darren and me were about drought. And of course, the last ones are mostly about flooding and sea level rise. And urbanization has a big effect on our city and also the water management. As you can see here, pictures of the states like New York. You have Central Park, which is really green, and the rest is gray. You can imagine that the green park doesn't do a lot with heat stress in the streets beneath it. It's really separated in this case, and we need to have green all around the city to infiltrate the water where it falls for drought, so we can have our groundwater levels back, which are largely minimizing in a lot of cities. So you can see that we need very much greening of the city. And I think how to do that is very complex. That's why I was in Vancouver last week. And I think these artists very visualized what our task is. On the left, you see pavement, which is too much. We have to open it up. That might be permal pavement or hollow roads or, a lot of infrastructure-related nature-based solutions. In the middle, there's a scissor in a grass field that should be a swale or a rain garden, and on the right a very good example from an artist in Sweden, which symbolizes the green that wants to get back in the city, and we have to allow that, of course. And I think walking through the Netherlands with over 1,500 locations of swales that already are being mapped and rain gardens all around, green infrastructure is really the way to go. And there's a lot of examples for that you can visit, of course, from the Dutch context. Here are some pictures all around the Netherlands. You see the green rail tracks from trams, for example. There are really eco corridors through cities are really made, and a lot of very inspiring projects that you can find. But maybe you're thinking of a project now and you want some solutions that are very in the local context, because it of course matters where you are, what kind of geohydraulics situation you're in, for example. And all around the world, there are a lot of platforms that can help you. It's local context, so here are some QR codes that you could open, and that brings you to platforms that are specifically for your situation. So there's a Canadian platform, and the Dutch know probably the NAS and other green-blue platforms that you can use. One of them, which is more about really engaging, that you can use yourself, is Climate Scan. So that's why I mentioned this one. You can really find the solution that I just showed mostly are from Climate Scan. And it ticks a lot of boxes. That's why it's an EU report on nature-based solutions. And if you're into it, it's just a map. It has an app, so you can put all your greatest projects there. And of course, look in Canada what they're doing, or all around the world. If we specifically talk about drought, go to South Africa, for example. There's a lot of great examples that we in the future, after our dry year in 2018, should really apply. And that's not all, of course. We really should relate that also, if we go to the urban area, to different urban typologies. So what I do, and 1,500 people around the world, is go out and see maybe this green wall, which is in Almere, and I relate that to the urban characteristics, because it's very different if you're in the center of Metro Vancouver, for example, than in Burnaby. And that was one of the talks that we have. So go out, find your solution and put them on a map. There are great solutions all around. I think Vancouver or Canada is quite interested in the Dutch situation, of course, because of our work with water, but also with more colder climates. So that would be Sweden, Norway, Copenhagen, as you can see here. Copenhagen after 2011, 150 millimeters in 2 hours, quite impressive. There's so much done on very inspiring projects that you can find there in Copenhagen, but also Malmo, who started 35 years ago already with very citizen participation on a great work. So if you don't have holiday plans, you could maybe visit both. It's only 50 minutes on that bridge that you probably know from the Netflix series. And every city is different. You can see that as well. Because of that mapping and urban characteristics, you see that some cities really focus on green roofs. Some are really focusing on bioswales or permeable pavement, and that's quite nice. As you can see here, Johannesburg is here as well, and there's a large work on water demand, so or reuse of water, which I think is really inspiring. And you can find over 200 of these projects in that area. So that could be very helpful. And last week, I had a great week. It was quite rainy in Vancouver, actually, but that really relates to my work because there were a lot of questions on mapping, which we've done in Vancouver. Just 2 days, I mapped over 100 projects, and it's really about green roofs and bioswales and rain gardens, for example. So we did a lot of testing, as you can see on these pictures here. This is all rain gardens. This one is in Metro Vancouver, and this one is in Burnaby. And you can find all these projects there and some analyzation as well. So at that workshop, I asked, and I think that's a good topic to close up with as well, what is an inspiration for Canada, what we showed? Because of course we showed a lot of things, but every person is different. It was very multidisciplinary. There were governance people, social scientists, technical people. So I'm just going to brush through some of the things that are of interest for them. And one of them is, of course, well, in the Netherlands, we started about 1997 with the Green Revolution, so to say. These are the first swales in the Netherlands from Enschede, Ruwenbos. And if you compare pictures from 2001 and 2007, you will see that they're totally the same. So that makes it sustainable urban drainage systems. And also that we make top views. This is a top 20 from Climate Scan from last year, where you really can find trends and different inspiration from around the world. And you can see it's all about greening the city mostly. So bioswales instead of swales. So as we call it in the Netherlands, natuurvriendelijke wadis instead of wadis, swales in this case. And that's quite inspirational. So most of these projects and how you implement that in the urban context, these are specific rain gardens from all around the Netherlands you can find, and they were very much interested on that, and especially also the guidelines where I will finish up with. Top views. Mostly what is very nice, these are not very expensive or very hard to implement implementations, as you can see here. So that's a hollow road on the left, for example. There's a rain garden in Amsterdam on the right. So you can see there are a lot of examples, and also, of course, they have a lot of green roofs already, but optimize them, that they will react to the weather forecast, that you can put very much water on it, or also use it for mitigation. So solar panels that have a higher efficiency on green roofs. That was quite nice. Polder dak, as we call it in the Netherlands, was quite received in a very positive way and to be implemented. And some of the gray or green infrastructure have not been implemented in Canada yet. So most of the Dutch people will know the water squares in Rotterdam, but actually there are 15 already in the Netherlands, also Malmo and then Copenhagen. So that's quite inspirational. And these are large gray infrastructure that could hold up like 1,000 cubic meters also. And looking at where you can implement green infrastructure in the urban dense area, of course, playgrounds are transformed in the Netherlands as this one, which was highly viewed on Climate Scan last year. It has a multifunctional. It's about recreation. It's about flooding. It's about drought because it's infiltrating. So there are a lot of functions with these multifunctional bioswales that I find quite inspirational. And of course, there are a lot of innovation as well. As you can see here, not getting into it, but it could be a question question on one of these pictures that you see why that's an inspiration to Canada or actually all around the world, because we have to really try out new things because the challenge is quite big. One of the biggest questions they have is about sustainability and the long-term efficiency. Of course, if we talk about permeable pavement, everybody probably knows who's really in this topic that they clog and they need maintenance and they don't have the capacity. We have water authority, so the institutions are very different than we have in Canada or at other places in the world. And one of the things we did last week was to do that international knowledge exchange about the sustainability, about the long-term efficiency, and that's actually something we do all over the world, and that's called Climate Cafe. So last week was Climate Cafe Vancouver, and we talked about results from other climate cafes. And a climate cafe is nothing more than going out in the field, visit green infrastructure, and discuss the opportunities, but also the challenges, of course. So you see a big group of people that joined us, and we did some measurements there as well. We did a full-scale testing, which was quite nice. Flood fighting, as we call it in the Netherlands. There's a great movie about it if you want to have some more info on this. It's basically that we don't do very small field tests, but we flood whole areas, whole streets, whole swales, as you can see on these pictures as well. And they give a lot of information because people see what's happening. What is green infrastructure? And sometimes when we do these testing, people come out, residents, and they actually don't know that they live near a bioswale or a water square or anything. So that's quite related, and that was quite new for the Canadian context. And the other way around as well, I learned a lot that a lot of the green infrastructure in Canada is actually maintained by residents, and that's really new for the Dutch perspective. And research is done by citizen science, which is quite nice. And I found this paper on it, and I really want to bring that to the Netherlands because that's quite an inspiration, especially if you don't have water authorities or other organizations that could be very nice in this context. And of course, well, long-term efficiency of rain gardens, as you can see here, we do a lot of testing in the Netherlands, and not only in the Netherlands, but also around the world. So left is Norway, which spoke a lot to technical engineers because they have snow de-icing, and that changes the patterns of infiltration as well. But I'm not going to go into that because that might be quite scientific. But if you see the slides, there are a lot of publications underneath that you can find if you want to read more about that context. Maybe Poland, Gdansk was quite of interest, Amsterdam, Netherlands, of course, monitoring, but also a lot of locations, as I showed before. And these hydric conductivity, where we have a lot of doubts in the Netherlands, mostly because we're below sea level. Can you even infiltrate there? But also in Canada, of course, in peaty soils, clayey soils, rock soils, can you infiltrate? Well, there are a lot of infiltration capacity measurements that can help to build more trust for stormwater management that it does infiltrate. But sometimes it takes a bit more time and therefore a bit more space in the urban area. But as I showed before, there are a lot of creativity. And it's just knowing about this different functions in different climates, but also about drought, highly intensive rainfall. There's a lot of information already out there, and especially applied science, as I do, can lead to very practical guidelines for design and maintenance, and also the construction of it, to ensure that there's a long-term efficiency of these green infrastructure, not only in the Netherlands, of course, but also in Vancouver. And the next Climate Cafe will be about these guidelines. What can we learn? How can we make sure that we make perfect green infrastructure so it will last a long, long time and be a great answer to drought, heat stress, and also flooding. So that was a speed up. So last words maybe on this point. I think I showed we share challenges. Canada is not that different from the Netherlands, the other way around. We can learn, of course, from a lot of challenges that are more focused in a certain area. And I gave the example of South Africa, for example, being on drought. So I think if we share those challenges, we should share the solutions as well. And there are a lot of cost-effective nature-based solutions. And I showed a lot of examples that you can find yourself. Challenges that we share from Canada and also the Netherlands is The governance, of course, which is totally different between our countries. The long-term efficiency, it's everywhere a big question on the cost of maintenance and the capacity that you have in your organization and the knowledge as well. So there will be a lot of seminars like this really help getting a message across that is about capacity building or raising awareness. Practical examples of resilient infrastructure, over 5,000 in the Netherlands, only over 100 in Vancouver. So you can find them and find your inspiration in your local area, which you could find. Those are the tools and information that I provide. There's a lot of more scientific papers, and feel free to reach out if you want to know more about the efficiency of green infrastructure. We have a lot of information about that, of course, that you can also find on the open source climatescan.org. And of course, this is for me, of course, but if you have any questions or you want to see a different type of project around the world, then I'm more than happy to help out. And that would be it for me. So thank you for your attention, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much, Floris. Feel free to take a sip of water yourself as well. This was a very Speedy Gonzalez college, but very passionate as well. Now we've seen 2 presentations. Thank you very much to the both of you. There are some Q&As, some questions coming in for the people. We still have a quarter of an hour left, so feel free to ask these questions. And maybe, Darren, starting with you, there's someone asking or stating that Native Americans have used controlled fires for centuries to reduce damages by wildfire. So referring back to the hottest village on Earth last year, like 46 degrees. Are these types of ancient practices also considered at all in Canada?
Yes, no, great question. I think the integration of traditional Indigenous knowledge and practices is going to be absolutely key to building climate resilience over time, because, of course, Indigenous peoples in North America have been dealing with changes in climate and weather for a millennia. And in fact, yes, controlled burns are a practice being used for management of forests. To the degree that it is reaching its potential, I'm not entirely sure, but that is part of the forest management practice, and of course that's key because the boreal forest region in Canada is quite extensive, going literally across almost the entire country. And the whole of society approach that's going to be required for building resilience across Canada, it's going to need not only engaging all different types of professionals in the design of systems and the connection of systems for building resilience, but it's going to have to incorporate traditional Indigenous knowledge and perspectives because of that knowledge that exists in those previous practices.
Yeah, it's actually something that Floris touched upon as well. It's like a huge challenge. So we need all kind of solutions. Someone of you pointed out that probably in China or in Eastern Europe, I hope you can still see me. There we go. There's some flooding as well. Obviously, we don't really cover that because we focus on comparing Canada with the Netherlands. Floris took some inspiration from his trip as well in Vancouver. Were there some things, Darren, that stood out for you in the presentation of Floris that you thought, wow, that's totally different done in the Netherlands compared to what you see in Canada?
Well, I think a lot of the similarities were really quite interesting. And I guess for me, being sort of situated in the middle of the country, the floating cities part of it is something I don't work on directly. So that was quite interesting to see that. Of course, the ability to share knowledge between, the cities like Vancouver and the cities that you have as well on that regard are quite key. But when you get into the types of green infrastructure in the urban settings, you start to see those appear in different cities across Canada, in the larger centers, that is. So that was encouraging to see. But I think from Floris, I think one of your main points was the importance of knowledge sharing on this. As these practices start to unfold and the new technologies emerge, just these types of climate cafes, these knowledge sharings, this report that we did at the International Institute last year about sharing knowledge across Canada, this is going to be really key to us to really move the needle and accelerate change.
Yeah, sweet. Well, what else? I am scrolling through some of the questions right now. Where are the tiny forests? Is a question for you, Floris. That's maybe yet another example. We saw a car being topped upside down.
Yeah, there was a very tiny forest on a car, more like a constructed wetland. But indeed, tiny forest is actually a category in Climate Scan as well that's being mapped. It's really something that's picking up in the Netherlands now. So I think there are already more than 20 locations that you can visit. So indeed, that's quite nice. Really tapping into biodiversity, and also maybe the last question about China. Of course, I've done the same in China as well. Spawn cities are really big. Also some tiny forests up there. So there's a lot of information that we should share. And as Darren said, that's more about, the capacity building or getting a message across. Technical, everything is possible, but it's more about governance or getting the word across, like solution brokering. And maybe one of the topics in the chat, I got quite interested in the questions. Also about in the Netherlands, of course, we have a Delta Commissaris, Peter Glas. I didn't find that in Canada. So, of course, we have resilient officers, more and more, I think, in Canadian cities as well, but really governmental, that might be something a bit missing. So I think these are really key. But the technical solutions in China or measures like tiny forest, you can find more easily now with platforms. So I hope that's an inspiration.
Yeah. One massive source you mentioned, Flores, and people said 80% actually said they do something with natural infrastructure already. To all the people, feel free to share your inspiration as well in the chat or in the Q&A. But Flores, you mentioned also climatescan.org. So even put your solution on the map if possible. And El Meyer, Flores is also asking, is there some kind of a newsletter or a platform where she can see or he can see on the climate cafes?
Yeah, that's actually, I will share the link. It's climatecafe.nl in this case. It was very Dutch, so sorry about the .nl. But you can find there's over 50 climate cafes with short videos. That is mostly of inspiration. And most of the climate cafes have scientific papers about it as well. And that's more about the interaction, the multidisciplinary challenges that we have. So I will put that in the chat as an answer. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Yeah. And then Darren, you started off your presentation with it's becoming too hot, too wet, too dry. In our preparation, you also mentioned the United States looking more south because the climate kind of starts mimicking that. Do you take lessons from that, like looking to your southern neighbor and see how they deal with the challenges that you face?
Well, I think one of the aspects is just that with our southern neighbor extending quite south all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, we see a whole range of climate zones currently. And in those different climate zones, different types of crops are grown, different practices. And as we see the climate projections for example, for the region I'm in Manitoba, in the mid to later parts of the centuries, our climate in the southern part, this agricultural area, will start to look like areas like Kansas, Nebraska, and even by the end of the century, like northern Texas. So we can look to what is being done there now in those climate situations as a hint as to, well, some of the practices we might need to be doing in the future in terms of types of crops, perhaps, and how to deal more with, intense storms, because in that southern part of the U.S. is really the tornado alley, the really intense thunderstorms that wreak significant damage. And we're starting to see more of those in the southern parts of Canada, and we are likely to see more of those in the future. So watching our neighbors to the south in different latitudes helps us to think about how to adapt.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen before, I guess in the previous webinar, which is still visible on the platform as well, is that people in various countries and maybe also in developing countries have another perspective on risk. Maybe in line with that, Darren, Boss is stating, this is very interesting, your presentation. Are there also considerations going on in Canada about reducing level of service of the infrastructure network, given the fact of the extent of the infrastructure network in Canada, which is vast. Well, actually, you don't have to be in Canada for that. Recently, there was a tunnel on the Dutch highway being closed off in the Netherlands because 2 controllers were sick and there was no one being able to supervise the tunnel, so cars couldn't go through. But how is that in Canada? Are they thinking about sometimes reducing the level of service on infrastructure?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad the participant brought up the aspect of asset management, because of course, looking at the big picture, we need to be managing assets from a cost, a risk, and a level of service perspective. And so that's a really key question. I think the focus so far has been sort of predominantly on just getting a handle on the risk to our asset base in towns and cities and rural settings. Now coming to grips with the cost of how to address those risks and to lower those risks. And so now, as was touched on, is now, thinking about, okay, well, we're going to have to also manage expectations around level of service. And can we continue to maintain that level of service that has been sort of traditionally maintained in Canada is a good question. And it's not as advanced as discussions and thinking around cost and risk, but you are 100% right that that will have to be part of the conversation because you have to balance all three: cost, risk, and service in sort of building resilience to assets, for sure.
Yeah. I see on the clock that we only have a few minutes left before we have to check out. One quick one: is it possible to share the presentations afterwards? Excellent. What's been said in the chat as well, it's being translated as well with Dutch subtitles, so maybe that's something that comes in handy for colleagues, maybe for people attending. Maybe, Floris, I don't know whether you still see a question that you find relevant or that you want to...
I think we brushed on most of it. One question from the chat was on the research. Is it recent? Well, the publications that I showed, some are actually from 2 weeks ago. So I think most of these publications are very actual and recent, and we will share those with the presentation, I presume. And as you could see, there's a lot of lines in in my slides as well, where you can find more info on several aspects. So. No, I think we brushed on everything, so that's nice. Yeah.
Maybe one of the final little parts is the financing of infrastructure. One of the most refreshing things I've seen, Darren, is that people, like citizens, feel very responsible themselves as well, instead of the more maybe lean back approach of Dutch citizen thinking, who's going to fix it right in front of my house? Is this also part of decentralizing, or is there one government party or body, better put, that's having an overview on where the money is being spent at from the national level?
Well, from a federal or government financing perspective, there's a range of different funds out there to help assist with accessing or leveraging federal provincial funds. Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund, and investing in Canadian Infrastructure Program, Northern Transportation Adaptation Initiative, a whole range of different sort of government-related funds. But of course, we're a federal country and a large federal country, so provincial governments have various programs, as do local initiatives. But I think the key thing is going to be the ability to kind of really leverage the innovative sources of financing, particularly investment portfolios, as I had touched on. There are a lot of companies out there that want to leverage and invest their funds in impact type investments where they can make contributions to sustainability and also now resilience. And so we want to help make sure that there's no barriers to that type of investment going forward, because that's going to be a really good decentralized mechanism, because private investors can get in there on smaller projects and collections of smaller projects.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for that. Well, I do see there are still some questions open. Maybe we can refer to them later on as well with sending out the presentations. At least one of you needs to catch a next plane towards Portugal. I understood. Yeah, there you are. You have your passport in hand, Floris, already. Darren Swanson as well. Floris Bogart, thank you very much for joining and sharing all of this knowledge with us. Thanks so much. And for the people attending, my final slides are thank you so much for joining. If you like, you can let us know how you liked it. There's a small survey link being put in the chat. And the next time we see each other on Friday, June, I guess we are back to regular time, which is 9 to 10 in the morning, which is Central European time or Western European time. And whenever you have any ideas yourself for a webinar, an event, a meetup session, whatsoever, please let us know. Thanks for joining us all, and we would love to see you back on the next time. Thanks, and have a very nice day ahead of you. Bye-bye.